Kathi Enderes, welcome back to the conversation today.
Oh, Jonathan, so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
It is a pleasure to have you back on the podcast. And today we're going to be talking about the Josh Bersin Company's roadmap for embracing agentic AI into HR by 2030. And this is a recent report by the Josh Bersin Company. It's also a series of programming and just the general effort that you're putting forth to help the profession, to help HR professionals move into the future of HR by embracing agentic AI. As we were talking just a minute ago, before we hit record, this is just such an important area. I think everyone's talking about AI, of course, but most people aren't really quite sure what to do with it. So many companies, are buying subscriptions to, Claude or to ChatGPT or whatever, and they're just telling people, okay, go play with it, go figure stuff out. But very few organizations are really, embracing it, having a plan, really moving forward in a strategic way. And especially, I think in the HR profession, where, historically at least, I think we've been a little bit slower to really launch full force into, disruptive technologies. And we need to, otherwise we're gonna get left behind. So I'm really thrilled to have a chance to sit down with you and to talk about this together today. As we get started, I wanted to share Kathy's bio with everybody. Kathi Enderes is Senior Vice President of Research and a Global Industry Analyst at the human capital advisory firm, the Josh Bersin Company, the world's largest community for HR. She has over 20 years of global experience in human capital, talent, and performance management, and in change management from consulting with IBM, PwC, and Ernst & Young, and industry working with companies of various sizes, from Fortune 50 companies to startups in multiple industries, including tech, healthcare, and leading research on all topics of HR talent and technology. She is passionate about making work better and more meaningful. I could go on. You've done so many really great and cool things in your career, but
Yes.
is there anything you would like to highlight by way of your own background or personal context before we dive on it?
Well, you said a lot of it, so thanks for that. I think the only other thing I always like to explain by way of explaining my audio or how I sound is that I'm originally from Austria, so people can stop guessing where I'm from and start listening and not trying to guess the accent. So that's where it's from. But I've lived in the US for quite some time and also lived in Austria and in London and in Spain. So a little bit of an international background. And yeah, really excited to talk with you about this because this is the topic really that we get most questions about whenever we talk with HR teams, but then also with HR tech companies as well. So
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think it's on everybody's mind. How do we capture that power of agents, AI agents, to make work better and more meaningful? As you said, that's my passion, and I feel this is actually something that we can now accomplish better with AI.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, let's dive on in. I know this was unveiled and discussed at the recent Irresistible conference. Tell us more about this framework, the roadmap for agentic AI and HR, as we look forward towards HR in 2030. That's not that far away. I mean, we're only
It's not
talking,
bad.
I mean,
Yeah,
we're halfway through 2026, so we're really talking
yeah,
only a few years away. Yeah,
right.
tell us a little bit about this.
Yeah, so the reason why we said we need really a broader roadmap for where HR is going because we've had AI now for 3.5, 4
Mhm.
years. But the way that we've thought about AI was until recently much more about individual productivity. And you mentioned
Yeah,
it too, right? Companies were launching ChatGPT or Copilot or any of the kind of Claude, anything that you would have basically. But it was mostly done for individuals to,
yeah,
I don't know, capture meeting notes, do some certain tasks better or something like that. So companies have been and are still mostly in these earlier stages of AI adoption where you're saying, well, we use AI as an assistant, right? And there's some value to that. Maybe you can do your emails faster, or maybe you can capture interview notes, for example, if you're doing recruiting or any of those kind of things. It's good, but it's not that disruptive. It's not that great. And if you're like many companies, then you probably also see that while we were very excited about doing things with AI assistance, now we're saying, well, maybe we shouldn't spend $10,000 a month on people writing their emails because they were perfectly fine able to write their own emails. And so maybe we should go back to writing our own emails because the incremental use is actually not worth it. So most companies are still in this earlier stage, but and that happens both for the companies, but then also for HR. But then we were thinking about, well, what about using AI as agents? So they can do a certain task for us, one task. An AI could schedule an interview. It could enroll somebody on a training course. It could write a job description, one thing basically for us. And that's already a lot better, but still not
Yeah.
that disruptive. So your job is still your job. And what you're doing in HR, probably still what you're doing in HR. You just do it a little bit faster and a little bit better. So there's like, we call this stage one and stage two of this AI transformation. And but then there's a huge step up when you're saying, how about connecting some of these task agents with each other. So, for example, in recruiting, you might have a job description agent that connects with a sourcing agent, with a pre-screening agent, with maybe an interview scheduling agent all together. And suddenly you have an entire workflow that's going to be done kind of multifunctionally. And
Hmm.
then, of course, what happens to the job of a recruiter, that changes a lot, right? So then you're going to think about how do we redesign jobs, the workflows, where do we want people to be part of that versus where do we want the agents to do things? So things change a lot when you go there, but then also the outcomes can be much better. So you could say, for example, not only do we do things faster, but maybe we have a better candidate experience in this example. Maybe we get better candidates as well. Maybe we find the right people much more easily. So it's not just about efficiency. And then the fourth stage is when you have these fully autonomous end-to-end, what we call super agents that connect everything together in a fully autonomous way. So one example on the recruiting side, for example, would be for um, frontline workers, let's just say truck drivers from FedEx or UPS, you could potentially do, and they're already doing that in some cases, do the entire recruiting process end to end up to the hire decisions fully autonomously. And the hiring manager is just deciding basically who to hire. And then off it goes also for the onboarding and all of that, again, fully autonomously by an agent. Doesn't work for all professions. So for example, you're not going to do this for an executive that you have all of this autonomously, but you can already see how this is going to change a lot how we do things when you have these fully autonomous things. So we saw that there's really an opportunity to help organizations to move on from these very early stages, stage one and two, to these higher stages, stage three and stage four. And so we did some research. We did a big study of many HR organizations. We saw that 68% of organizations are at stage one. So most
Hmm.
organizations are still in stage one. And by the way, that includes 20% that haven't even gotten really started on AI in a full
Hmm.
scale, basically. So most companies, if you listen to this and you're saying, well, we are kind of in stage one, too, don't be afraid, don't be unconcerned, because most companies are like that.
You're in good
And only
company.
2%. You're in good company. Exactly. You're in good company. Exactly. But we said, well, the technology is already here. So what's holding companies back in terms of moving up? And it's not that technology availability. In fact, I think all the HR leaders get a lot of calls from vendors all the time to sell them the magic solution with AI and all of that, whatever your domain is, whether that's in recruiting or whether it's in learning or in talent or in any of the other areas, HR operations too. But it's not so much about technology availability, but it's about redesigning jobs, redesigning workflows, redesigning the processes, and really transforming the HR organization around that. So that's where we saw the big need there, not so much to help people think about how do we use technology, but how do we do HR in a different way.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's all about workflow. It's all about job redesign, right?
That's
So
right.
with
Exactly.
all of the conversation around these really cool tools, and there are so many of them, and there's
So many.
constantly new tools being thrown at us, week in and week out. And they're fun to play with, but the tools themselves aren't going to accomplish much. You can
Yeah.
play with new tools, till you're blue in the face, but until you can have the coolest new tool, but until you start to
Yeah.
think about redesigning the workflows, redesigning, actually thinking really strategically about job redesign, you're not going to have anything better than at most incremental improvement on
That's
actual
right.
productivity gains, right? And
Yeah.
and so that's what I really see in my work with leaders and with organizations is
Yeah.
the biggest missing piece. Because yeah, everyone wants increased productivity and everyone sees the potential with AI, but I don't see many willing to put the work in. They just see the magic bean, they want to grow the beanstalk
Yes.
and they and they
Yes.
they, they want, they want the immediate gain and they don't realize that, hey, there's actually a good amount of work that's going to have to go into making this magic box actually produce something really cool for you. Um,
Absolutely.
and
Yeah.
and so everything you're saying absolutely resonates with me and what I'm seeing as well. There is so much really cool potential here, and the whole conversation around super agents and connecting across different workflows and such. Absolutely, there's so much that can be accomplished, but we just have to be really, really thoughtful and strategic about it as we move
Yeah.
forward. One thing that you've kind of started to touch on, and I know it's something that's in your framework and in your roadmap, is the agent sprawl
Yeah.
component here.
Yeah.
Because on the one hand, we want to have redesigned workflows, we want to be really strategic about, agentic AI, but you can overdo it too. Like
Yeah.
all of a sudden, you
Yes.
can start to have an agent for everything.
That's
And
right.
to talk to us more about agent sprawl and how we can protect against that.
Yeah, I mean, and agent sprawl is such an interesting concept because just a few years ago we didn't even know what an agent was, and suddenly we were
Yeah.
talking about agent sprawl, but it's already happening. Just to give you an example, we were working with a big bank headquartered in New York, and we were talking about talent acquisition, and they said they already built 17 agents for just their recruiting process alone. And I said, well,
Yeah.
that's great. And how do you connect them all? And how do they use the same data? And how do they hand off to each other? And they said, well, that's the problem. They don't. So I think and that's of course then when they don't do that, you get into all sorts of problems because these agents they are very different to regular traditional software. It's not just about connecting them because they are learning organisms, right? And they're not deterministic, they're probabilistic. So you never quite know what you're going to get unless you give them really tight guardrails and really tight, like what data they can access, for example, and what data they should learn on and what data they shouldn't learn on. And so there's all this kind of danger, the risk, if you don't control it well and if you don't connect them well, to have them go into all sorts of different directions because you can't really test them like you test regular software, where you could say, if I tried this and I ran the use case through, then it's always going to be like that because it's constantly learning, it's constantly grabbing something that it might not, should not have access to, for example. So
Yeah.
that's kind of the danger of the agent sprawl. So the way to think about that is, or the way to counteract the agent sprawl is really thinking about not for all the tasks and all the steps that you do today and then agentify them. That's kind of the old way of doing things, right? You say,
Yeah.
well, this is how we do recruiting today, or this is how we'll do learning today. We need a performance consultant, and then we need somebody who sets up the curriculum and somebody who designs the course and all of that. Well, then you are just putting automation on the old process, but thinking about it in a different way. What's the outcome of this process? And then how can we accomplish this in new ways
Hmm.
where we use the AI to, for example, in the learning area, to get every employee the skills that they need when they need it, how they need it, rather than saying, well, we need to agentify our curriculum and make kind of the online training course now agentic and all of that. That's kind of the old way to think about it. We always compare this to the same way that you had like and when you're a driver, basically, we've had like drive assist and lane assist and park assist, all these assistive features for us as drivers, and they're great. But then the autonomous car comes around, and then you're saying, well, the point of the car is actually not to make the driver more efficient or more effective, but to get the passenger from point A to point B. So think about what's the outcome, and then you identify that. So that's kind of how we're thinking about avoiding agent sprawl. And then, of course, bringing them together in higher level, what we call the super agents, basically, that we categorized just 7 super agents of all the 95 capabilities that HR is basically doing. We categorize them into 7 super agents. So there's only 7 things that we said on a macro level that HR needs to do. And then you say, what agents would I need underneath them to accomplish what this big super agent is out there to accomplish? So just thinking about these outcomes in different ways and then working your way backwards rather than just saying, here's all the tasks I do and then how I put an agent behind it.
Yeah, the outcome-based approach is really the tricky bit because it takes
Yeah,
a completely different mindset from what we've always done.
that's right.
And that's exactly the opposite approach from what most everyone is doing.
Yes, it's
So
true. It's true.
yeah,
Yeah,
you're seeing it all over the place, and
yeah,
everyone as they're getting access to all these different tools, or they're getting, or even just playing with Claude or whatever, is they're you're absolutely right. They're taking the exact opposite approach, is they're just looking at all these individual little discrete tasks, and they're saying, how can
yeah,
I automate this? And then how can I start to link all these tasks together? And maybe they can do that in a way that makes sense, and they can automate workflows and do it in a way that ultimately uh, will bring, great automated success for them. But largely that is just the wrong way to think about it. That and
it's the wrong way to.
it's hard to get out of the mindset because of course that's how we've always done it. Why-
That's right.
It's so you just have to think like an inventor, right? You just have to like get out of your own way
Right.
and completely think about it in a completely different way. And that's easy for us to sit here and say.
Yeah,
It's much harder to do when you're actually the person that's like in the day to day, and
of course.
you've always done stuff a certain way, and now you're all the saying, all of a sudden you're saying, okay, how do we completely change the way we think about how work gets done? It's easy to say, hard to do.
It's
Uh,
Yeah. Yeah, we actually just had a workshop at Irresistible. We had a workshop exactly about this topic for 1.5 hours where we had 200 HR leaders do just that. So I
mhm.
facilitated a workshop about redesigning work in the AI age, and we used HR as an example because we said, well, everybody here understands HR work probably reasonably well. And it was really fascinating what people struggled with. I'll give you
Mm.
some examples. So people already struggled with how do we prioritize? Where do we start? Because we
Yeah.
said you got to pick one job or one area, basically, whether that's learning or recruiting or HR service center or pay processes, one area to start with. And that was already very hard because people said, well, how do I prioritize? And we're like, well, you can think about where there's lots of people, where there's lots of AI opportunity, where there's lots of value for your organization. And already that was very hard because when you prioritize one thing, you say no to another thing, and people don't want to say no to anything. So that was already one of the hard things. And then people also really struggled with, you mentioned it too, with just starting with the outcome, not saying these are all the tasks that we're doing and that which ones can be done by AI and which ones should be done by people, but what is this process accomplishing and how could we use a different way of doing that? And that, of course, requires you to think outside of the box and also understand a little bit of what AI can actually already do. So it was a muscle that people, I think, to your point, are not very used to flexing, but it's going to be really, really important for this future of work for us.
Yeah. One aspect that's the scary, thing around AI is everyone's worrying about displacement, right? Job displacement. And there's a lot of people suggesting, that we could see, upwards of 30 to 50% of jobs being displaced within HR teams.
Yeah.
AI super agents. They're going to start handling talent, rewards, employee experience. Yeah, how should we be thinking about this in our HR teams?
Well, there's certainly going to be lots of opportunity to do things faster and more efficiently, but the big value is not going to come from that. The big value is really going to come from what organizations can do that they could never do before.
Yeah,
Like, for example, I'll give you one example, one case study, one example that we have from a specific company, ServiceNow, for example. They are internally, not for their customers, but internally, their HR team, they saw that their HR business partners were their primary opportunity where they wanted to add value, which is interesting because most of the times you go to the more transaction heavy processes like talent acquisition or learning and development or HR service center, those kind of things. But they thought they really wanted to double down on their HR business partners because they have lots of organizational change, they have lots of acquisitions that they do, and lots of reorgs and all of that. So they said HR business partners where we want to double down on, but not for a displacement opportunity at all, but to give what they built, for example, is what they call a data, an employee, people data agent that in the moment of an a business conversation, when the HR business partner sits with their business teams, they can ask the people data agent, what's our turnover for this group? How does it compare to other areas internally? What's driving that turnover? All of that in the moment of need while the leadership team is discussing a certain topic, rather than going back to their people analytics teams afterwards, bringing the answer back 2 weeks later, and then the leadership team says, we've moved on. We're not even talking about this anymore. We're talking about something else now. So having them be much more immediate, much more embedded, and much more value added. That's, I think, the bigger lift that we'll see with AI is not the displacement, but it's really the adding a lot more value to the business at that kind of um,
yeah,
business value, bringing business value. I mean, another example is when you, for example, in the front line can hire much more quickly when you reduce time to hire from like weeks to days, for example, like 7-Eleven or McDonald's, some of the companies that have lots of frontline employees and they use lots of AI to shorten that time period. Well, Chipotle, for example, they spoke at a conference and they said, now we could open so many more restaurants because we get more people in. So that frontline availability directly results into revenue. Nobody talks about this little bit of savings that you get from the HR side if you're saying, well, we can actually open new restaurants and create more revenue for the business. So that's kind of the mindset shift that we want to think about. When you're just thinking about HR efficiency, the impact is tiny, right? Because how much
mhm,
does HR cost? It's 1% of, typically less than 1% of the overall company payroll is HR. And then you take another like 5% or even 10 or 15 or 20 or 30%. It's still tiny when you think about the upward potential that we can create. And that's kind of how we're always thinking about. Don't think about just the productivity savings of AI, think of HR, but think about the employee experience, the effectiveness, getting people, the right people in jobs, getting people in the jobs more quickly, creating more value to the business because you can answer their questions more quickly. And eventually you can make every employee much more productive. That's kind of how we're always thinking about that.
I love it. I love it. I think that's the perfect way to frame it and to think about it, not to get stuck in the doom and gloom. You could spiral and think about nothing else. And of course, yes, will there be displacement? Of course, there's going to be some task displacement. There's going to be some
Yeah,
job displacement. Of course, there will be, but there's going to be so much that opens up where we can focus our time and energy on things that really matter. That
yeah,
gets me really excited that we can really
yeah,
add value. So, Kathi, it's been
yeah.
just a pleasure. I appreciate you taking your time to come on to share these insights and to share this vision for the future of agentic AI and HR for the future. As we wrap up, I just wanted to give you a chance to share with the audience how they can connect with you, find out more about your work, your team, and then give us a final word for today.
Well, thank you, Jonathan. Time is flying, of course. So it's always fun and it's always great to talk with you. So thanks for that. Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn, connect on LinkedIn. I just basically put my name in and you find us and all the information, all the insights about HR 2030 on our website, joshbersin.com, and then you do /HR 2030, pretty straightforward. And we really see this as an ongoing program to help the HR profession to move into the future. So my last words maybe for everybody who's listening, don't be concerned about that. I see this as a very positive movement, a very engaging and empowering movement for all of us in HR to add much more value and to have more fun at work too and do the things that we're here to do.
Wonderful. Kathi, thanks again. It's been a pleasure. I encourage the audience to reach out, get connected, find out more about what Kathi and her team can do for you. Check out the report, check out all the great resources. And as always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe, that you can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope you all have a great week.